but it's like, can I fully surrender to what this experience is trying to show me? And I think when you're in that dark night of the soul, that's the practice that I would offer to people that will make it feel actually less painful. It's the same in the cold water. When you surrender your body, there is still a pain, but it's not the pain of resistance.
Ally, welcome back to the podcast, my friend. It's been like 3 years, but it's so good to see you.
So good to be here. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, I'm pumped about this conversation. It's going to resonate with a lot of people because the last time we spoke, we talked about the power of writing things down. But today we're going to drill down really on this principle of writing about our stories in order to live, and I love this, with more purpose and more confidence. I want to back up just a bit to start, though. Set this up. Take us back to your backstory.
Yeah.
And really just kind of walk us through the freedom and healing that came as you applied this practice to your own life. I know some of your story, but folks joined with us may not. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So I've been working in publishing for 13 years now, and I've been mostly helping authors to bring their books into the world. So some of that has been like co-writing or ghostwriting or developmental editing. A lot of it has been coaching people to build an outline to their book so that they can get it written and get it published. And I started to notice a common thread when I was working with people on writing. A lot of them are, not everyone was writing memoirs. I mean, a lot of people that I work with are writing, most everybody is working on a nonfiction book. So some of them are telling personal stories and some of them are just talking about their experience in another kind of way. But either way, no matter what kind of book that they were working on, I was watching people have this really profound spiritual, transformative experience with the act of writing their story. So they would be writing about a particular section of their life. Maybe they were writing the story of their marriage, and I would watch as this healing event would take place in their marriage. It's like something would transmute or transform for them in their marriage while they were writing about their marriage. Or maybe they were writing about their business and something would transform for them while they were writing about their business. Or they were writing about money and something would transmute inside of their money while they were writing about money. So I was like, what is this that I'm witnessing? And while I was watching that happen, I went through a really dark time in my personal life. I was going through a divorce. Because I was married to a pastor. We had planted a church together. So the divorce was extra complicated because it was also like, for me, tied to my faith. It felt like my faith was falling apart. The only way that I had ever known God or experienced God or understood what that was, it was just sort of crumbling underneath my feet. It was a really dark night of the soul. And at the time, I was working on a book that was set to be published that was about my marriage. The book was supposed to be called Our First Years, and it was talking about just the challenge of the first few years of marriage. Well, my marriage was falling apart. I mean, I was literally filing for divorce while I was writing this book. So I was like, I'm not going to ever be able to write this book. But for whatever reason, while I was going through that time, I just felt this inexplicable, unstoppable pull to write about what was happening to me. So I would get up every morning, I would go to the coffee shop as if I was writing a book, even though I never planned to publish it. I would go sit for 2 hours and I would just write about what was going on in my life. So I was like writing the story of going to the lawyer's office and literally freezing like a fight or flight freeze state outside of the elevator at the attorney's office, like unable to move, just standing there watching people come in and out, like ding, ding, doors open, doors close. And I'm just like, I can't go anywhere. I'm writing about that. I'm writing about, the day that my attorney told me that my now ex-husband was going to get our dog. So he came over to get the dog and I'm letting go of the dog and sobbing at the door, So just everything that was going on, like all the grief I was feeling, the devastation, the confusion, I was writing about all of it. And I started to notice I was having a similar experience to what I was watching my clients have, even though I was writing something that was not, in my mind, was not publishable. Like this wasn't something I was going to share publicly. But I was still having this experience of like witnessing myself inside of the story. And because of that, I was able to change the way that I responded to it. So for me, the big shift was instead of feeling like, how could this happen to me? How could he do this to me? This is the worst thing ever, which is that there were times when I definitely felt that way. Instead of feeling like that, I started to almost witness myself as the hero of the story, as if I was watching a movie on the screen. and I'm rooting for the main character, and I'm like, you go girl. Yeah, you get, like you stand up for yourself. You fight for that. You go file for divorce. Like you can do this. And it just completely reoriented the way that I experienced everything that was happening in my life. And it's not like it made it painless, but it just gave me the ability to engage with it in a different way. And after having that experience, I actually did end up publishing that book. It's called Indestructible. That one came out in 2018. But really, it wasn't about the publishing of the book. It was about the experience of writing it. The reason I wanted to write Your Story, this new book, is because of the experience I had writing about that really dark night of the soul and the ways that it changed me.
I won't take us here for too long, but you can if you want. So it's really interesting, Ally. I am walking through that dark night of the soul season right now. It's really painful. It has been almost a year. I talked to Allison Cook about it. I talked to Steve Carter about it. And now here, you're the third person in a month who has said that. You can take this wherever you'd like, but I think we need to camp here for a moment. What do you want to say about the experience as encouragement to folks? Maybe any learnings from it? I think it's something that happens to us in a way. But I'd love to hear your wisdom on that before we move on.
Do you know what's so weird is this is what's coming up for me to say, that I sometimes now in my life, I have a lot more stability in my life now than I did back then. My faith has reorganized itself. It's different, but it's like really rich and beautiful and lovely. And I'm remarried to a wonderful man. We have 2 happy, healthy kids. Like my life is by and large really light and free. And obviously I still have problems that I face, but it's not like it was back in 2015. When I think about that time back in 2015, I actually think of it with a great affection. And that's what I want people to hear who are walking through that time. Like, I think of that, like, there's such a, I was just telling my husband, Matt, this the other day. There's such a presence that comes with tragedy that you can't go anywhere but right here. It's like, you can't, you can't really think about the future. There's no path in front of you. You can't salvage the past. It's gone. Like, I remember feeling like that with my life during that time. Like, someone came in with a sledgehammer and destroyed everything that mattered to me. And there was no putting the pieces back together, is how it felt. So it's like, there's no going back to the past. It's gone. The bridges are burned. There's no going forward to the future. There's no path here. Like, I don't know where I couldn't picture my future at all. And so there was such a presence. It was like literally 1 minute at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time. That is really special and spiritual. And even though I say that with also a breadth of understanding that it doesn't feel that way always in the moment, it can feel really crushing in the moment. But I also want people to know, when you're walking through the dark night of the soul, you are in a thin place. You are so close. You're so aware. You're so present to the insights, the wisdom that comes from another, like a dimension, and you're so in touch with that in a way that you aren't when you have more stability and security, and you can kind of rely on yourself, like on your mind and on your, so sometimes I think back to that time and I'm like, that was such a special time. Like, I almost miss it.
Because you're on the other side of it now.
I'm on the other side of it.
Ally. Well, that's encouragement to me. It's interesting you say that, because I think you've given us a couple gifts here. Like, we get perspective on the other side of it. There is another side of it.
Yes.
What's the advice to someone so that we don't fight against growth? Like, the goal isn't to get over this quickly. The goal is to walk through this with the intention of growth. Any advice to walking through this well?
I learned this from 2 of my mentors, so I can't claim this, but it has really profoundly shifted my life experience. That it's really about fully receiving what life is trying to offer you moment to moment. So we think, and a lot of self-help, I can pause for a second so we can take that in.
Yeah, please.
Fully receiving. It's about fully receiving whatever life is here to offer you moment to moment. So a practice I've picked up in the last couple of years is cold plunging. And cold plunging is such a great metaphor for this, right? Like, you get into the water and it's about fully receiving the sensations that this experience has to offer you. Is it pleasant? No, it never is. And cold plunging is one of those experiences or activities where it doesn't ever become more pleasant. It's not like working out where like the more you do it, the better it feels.
Right,
it's like
right.
cold plunging is always, at least for me, I've been doing this for over a year, almost 2 years now. And every time I get in the water, it's equally unpleasant. But it's like, can I fully surrender to what this experience is trying to show me? And I think when you're in that dark night of the soul, that's the practice that I would offer to people that will make it feel actually less painful. It's the same in the cold water. When you surrender your body, there is still a pain, but it's not the pain of resistance. The pain of resistance is the worst kind of pain.
Why? Why? That's huge.
Oh, because, well, I don't know. The only thing I can think to say is because you really actually want to fully receive what's here for you. The highest part of you wants to receive it, you know? In my opinion, in my mind, like in my experience, divorce was worst case scenario. It was like, and even I've had a lot of conversations with my parents about this because on my side of the family, there's no divorce. Like you go back like 12 generations, like beyond that even, there's not a single divorce. I'm the first one. So it felt like the most colossal failure to give in or surrender to this thing. And, you know, I mean, it's part of what kept me in the marriage for so long because the marriage was miserable the whole time I was in it. But I kept fighting and fighting and fighting, thinking like, I just have to fight to keep this together. I just have to fight for my marriage. And I think that the idea of fighting for something good it's not bad. It's just sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is actually to surrender the fight. It's to stop fighting for the thing and to trust that what is for us can't be taken away. What's for us, you don't have to fight for. And so yeah, can I fully receive what my life is trying to offer me, even if it's a divorce? Can I fully receive what my life is trying to offer me, even if it's the death of someone I love? Even if it's letting someone in their addiction go, you know, sabotage and like waste their life away, even if it's my concept of God, you know, like even if it's losing my house, like whatever painful thing that you're going through, can I fully receive what my life is trying to offer me in this moment? And I think, you know, you could even turn that into this sort of fight or job. The way that has helped me to think about it is to think of it like just 2%. Even if you can just receive it 2% more than you were receiving it a second ago. Receive the pain 2% more than you were receiving it a second ago. Receive the loss, receive the grief, receive the feelings of shame or pain or unworthiness 2% more than you were feeling it a second ago. Then it actually opens a space for the experience to move through you. And it's not, some of us I think this is, you know, taking us back to Write Your Story. One of the reasons why I wanted to teach people this is because it's a way to help you move through the experience rather than to get stuck in it. Because, you know, I think I noticed as I was going through the divorce that it would be possible for me to get so stuck in this experience that I was going to be bitter and resentful in perpetuity, like that I would sort of forever be like, men suck, you know, you can't trust anyone. Screw this. I'm just gonna close my heart and live alone and you know, and go make myself happy, which I could have done. But I had witnessed that happen in enough people before that I had the consciousness to go, I don't want that. That's not what I'm looking for. But in order to have something different, I have to move through this experience, let it move through me so that I don't live here forever.
This is so powerful and philosophical in nature, and I love it. Writing is about moving through the experience. So I want to connect this to some of your words. You said this quote, we've all spent seasons reacting to the world around us. And perhaps this is like what you were sharing about your story through your divorce, as though the world we're telling a story and we are simply the audience, bystanders watching it all happen. The result, now folks, lean in and listen. The result is a life of regret and a feeling that we missed our purpose. Okay, Ally, those are critical words. Here comes bitterness if we don't. Here comes cynicism. Here comes stuck. Here comes my maniacal attempt. And folks, listen, because many of you, many of us are unwilling to unclench our arms around the control or the illusion of control around life because of the pain of the past. And we're like, no, I never want to revisit that. But Ally, you're saying like this is now going to produce a life of regret and a feeling that we missed our purpose. Spend some time teaching out that underlying principle.
Yeah. I mean, the only way to allow this experience to move through is to fully feel it. So for me, that's one of the things that writing does for me, is it allows me to fully feel what's trying to happen. So to fully feel the pain and betrayal of what took place in the divorce, instead of to go like, the instinct is, and it's a good instinct, by the way, the instinct is to go, I'm shutting my heart down. That's too painful. I can't let that in. And it's a good instinct. It's a very protective, like I'm going to close my heart off because that hurt too bad to have someone treat me in that way. And so I'm never going to open my heart in that same way again. Think of like how much of our broader culture and even church culture almost teaches this. Like, you don't want to get hurt. You shouldn't date too many people, or you shouldn't have sex before you're married because you don't want to get hurt. It's like almost like the whole program, the whole system is built around avoiding pain. And I think what I learned through that season, one of the many things I learned, is that there's no way to avoid pain. And your resistance to pain is causing you more pain than the pain itself would have caused.
Can you say that again real fast? That is huge.
There's no way to avoid pain.
Yep.
There's no way. Your resistance to the pain that you fear is causing you more pain than the pain itself.
Wow. And this is where we can just nuance this to the specific focus of Write Your Story. And we'll get into some of the stuff we were talking about before we hit record here with like the research of Dr. James Pennebaker and stuff like that. This even sort of tips its hat to our first conversation on the podcast, folks, which I'll put a link to in the show notes. But Ally, you were saying like when we take time to write about our experiences, the better we understand ourselves. Why? Like this is about self-awareness, right?
Yeah. I mean, I call it looking in a mirror, or that's the analogy that I use in the book. It's like looking in a mirror at yourself and really looking honestly. And I think that the act of writing is about looking at yourself in the mirror and learning to love every part of yourself. It's about learning to let it fully in. So, think of like this, sorry for the like starkness of this analogy, but like stripping naked before you get in the shower. And how you kind of want to avoid the mirror. Like you're just like, oh, like there's parts of myself I don't really like to look at. But if you could really look in the mirror at yourself and take the whole thing in and not just take it in. I mean, in the first time you do this, probably it would be a little bit like, ooh, I don't love that part about myself. Or, ooh, like, oh, just sort of like the feeling. And writing is similar. Like when you write about your experience, the first draft of it, you're going to see things about yourself that you wish were different, or that cause you shame or cause you pain, or make you feel embarrassed. But the goal is not to feel embarrassed. The goal is to be able to see the whole story through the lens of love, so that you can fully accept every part. And when you can do that, you have nothing left to hide. I mean, this is why the book that I wrote about my divorce was called Indestructible, because there's a great quote from John Steinbeck. He says, "Perhaps a woman is stronger than a man, particularly if she has love in her heart. I suppose a loving woman is indestructible." And that quote really struck me. And I thought, like, the part of us, not just women, but part of us as humanity that is indestructible is the part of us that looks through the eyes of love and goes, I fully accept that about myself. So no matter what you say, doesn't matter. You can't touch me. It's different than I'm shutting down my heart. I'm protecting my heart because I never want to feel that pain again. It's like, I fully receive myself. I fully accept myself. I fully love myself. So how could you possibly touch me? And I don't live there 100% of the time, but I find that when I'm in a practice of writing, when I'm seeing my life experiences through the lens of narrative storytelling, it's easier for me to get there. It's like it opens a portal for the divine to speak to me and through me. And I really want to put people in touch with that tool because it's a simple tool. It's really simple and it's free. And it's crazy good therapy. I mean, I'm not saying fire your therapist. I'm saying use this in addition to and multiply times 10 the progress that you're making when you can see your own life experiences through the lens of storytelling.
Yeah, I want to get to that because, folks, I think what I want you to be able to do is walk out of this conversation with Ally and me and say, okay, I'm going to be empowered to begin this writing practice. I am going to learn how to implement this, but I want to say this before we get into this. This isn't about publishing. We're not talking. Mm-hmm. I think it'd be easy because, like my book just came out 5 weeks ago. You publish books and okay, we're authors. And what we're not telling people is put together a proposal, get an agent and go get published. Because for some, it might include that. But what matters is that we write the story down. Can you split this apart quickly just so that people don't misunderstand what we're headed
It's
toward?
like a Venn diagram, right? On the one side, you have publishing, like writing your story for publishing. On the other side, you have writing your story for healing. And they do cross over at some point. I work with authors, and they have a healing experience through writing and publishing their books.
It was mine. It was my experience,
Totally. And then sometimes people come to me, they come to a Write Your Story workshop or whatever, and they just are here for the healing, and they end up writing something that really strikes a chord with people, and it moves people. A great example of that, I had William Paul Young on my podcast recently, and he talked about his experience writing The Shack. One of the main reasons I wanted to talk to him is I had heard through mutual friends and through the grapevine his story of publishing, and it does such a good job of illustrating this. He told me on the podcast he wrote that book for 12 people. And that book has sold 26 million copies and been made into a major motion picture and has really moved a generation. And so sometimes we go to the story that we need to write for healing and we write it and it flows through us and it touches people and can be published and shared. Sometimes we go into the world of publishing to publish a book and we end up getting the healing, but they also are separate. And so it's like that Venn diagram. There's a place where they touch in the middle. But, I tell authors all the time, it's two different conversations. If you want to have a strategic conversation about the book you should publish, that's one conversation. And if you want to have a conversation about the story that's calling to you, that needs to be written, that's waking you up in the middle of the night, that's another conversation entirely. So we have to decide ahead of time which conversation do we want to have.
All right, so folks, the call to action is whatever the motivation is, there's going to be healing in your ability to write your story. And we'll get into the science of this actually right now, Ally. I'd love to hear your take on some of the science validating journaling exercises with no intention of editing, but instead getting it out of our spirit, soul, and body. What's your read on the matter?
So I'm a student of James Pennebaker, who you brought up before we started the recording.
Exactly that.
Dr. James Pennebaker. Mm-hmm. So he has done decades of research that show that writing is a really powerful tool to improve our mental, emotional, and physical health. The statistic that I always start with, because it's really shocking, is that the data shows if you write for 4 days in a row for 20 minutes at a time, that you can improve your immune system by 50%. So you're 52% less likely to go to the doctor for an upper respiratory infection or flu. So the act of writing about what's going on with you is having an impact on your biology, on your cells. It's not just a little mind trick you're playing on yourself, although even if it was, who cares? But I like sharing that statistic because this is not a placebo effect. It's measurable,
And that's what Pennebaker did in the 80s.
Yes, exactly. And so it starts with the impact on our physical body, but it moves to our mental and emotional health. And Pennebaker showed that a regular practice of writing, which by the way, he defines a regular practice of writing as 4 days in a row for 20 minutes at a time. So I share that to say, you can keep this small and manageable. You don't have to do this every day of your life for the rest of your life. Every 6 months, if you did it for 4 days in a row for 20 minutes at a time, that would be enough to be considered a regular practice of writing, according to Pennebaker. So Pennebaker also shows that people who write regularly have better relationships, They report being happier in their romantic relationships. They have better mental health outcomes. Cancer patients who wrote about their experience responded better to the chemo treatments than those patients who didn't. Addicts in recovery are more likely to stay in recovery if they're journaling. So just there's like no part of our lives that the act of writing can't touch. And, another person, it's not as research based, but another person who I really love is Julia Cameron. She wrote The Artist's Way, and that's been had a profound impact in my life too. She's a little bit more, she talks about morning pages, writing for 40 minutes every morning when you wake up, as a way to kind of a catharsis and to dump out what's happening in your head. And talks about how like that really connects you to that creative energy that's flowing through all of us all the time. I have learned so much from Julia Cameron. And I also think 40 minutes a day, every day forever is a little overwhelming for people and sometimes can feel like out of reach, especially I'm a mom. I have 2 little kids. And so 40 minutes a day, every day of my life for me is like, yeah, I don't think this is a season where I'm going to be able to access that. But you don't have to do it that way. You can do it 5 minutes a day, every day of the week, forever. You could do it, 10 minutes a day, 5 days a week, and take 2 days off, or however you want to do it, that it fits into your lifestyle. The idea is that engaging with this practice of writing about what's happening for you shows you to yourself, and it opens a portal so that the wisdom that your life is trying to give to you can come through.
Yeah, guys, I want to give you this quote from Dr. James Pennebaker because, again, if we're talking about your mental health, your emotional health, and Ally's here today as a professional writer, author, and now a practitioner of this, we want to give you demonstrable evidence of this. So again, the goal is I want to help you improve your mental health, your emotional health, and your neurophysiology. So here's Pennebaker. He said this, quote, "For the next 4 days, as Ally said, in 15 to 30 minute spans of time, write your very deepest thoughts and feelings about the most traumatic experience of your life or an extremely important emotional issue." Now, here's the key. Don't self-edit. Don't filter. Don't worry about anything. Get it out. And here's the evidence, Ally. I'll just kind of throw some stats onto what you contributed. Decreased anxiety, blood pressure, depression, muscle tension, pain, and stress. Enhanced lung and immune function. Improved memory, sleep quality, and social life. Increased grades and work performance. So there's the evidence right there. And guys, I'm going to give you some data in the show notes at wintoday.tv if you want to take a deeper dive in this. But Ally, what else do we need to know about the science side of this? And then I want to get straight to it. You as a writing coach, let's just get into the tactical side of it.
Yeah. One thing I want to add that I think is really important, because Pennebaker's work doesn't show why this works. I don't know why, other than I can take a guess, I've worked through my online courses and one-on-one with people. I've worked with thousands of people to help them get their stories out of their heads and hearts and onto the paper. And I think the reason why the act of writing is so powerful is because of what we talked about a minute ago about fully receiving your experience. Most of us in our lives, even people who are very high functioning, who have a lot of friends, who are very well supported, who are seeing a therapist, whatever, most of us don't feel like we have any place in our life where we can go to be fully received and contained. We have nowhere, most of us, where we can go, where we can say our deepest thoughts and feelings about the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to us, and where we feel like someone's going to go, yeah, you have every right to be that mad. Yes, you have every right to be that upset. We feel like most places we go, we get censored, we get judged, we get shut down. It's inconvenient for people to see our anger. It's inconvenient for them to see our grief. People are like, can you just clean this up? Like, can we just move on to the next thing? Because it's uncomfortable. So what writing gives us is a space where it's safe to go and share everything. And I think this is one of the reasons why emphasizing that you're not doing this for publishing is so important.
Thank you.
Because if you go into this thinking like, oh, I'm going to write my story and I'm going to publish it and 26 million people are going to read it, the human brain just works this way. You are inevitably going to self-edit. Because when you start to think about 26 million people reading this story, you're going like, well, what's going to make me look good?
Right, Ally.
And this is not about looking good. And then the other thing I tell writers about the truth, because people are always like, how do I balance the truth between the truth and then like how I want the story to go? The truth evolves and changes. Nothing stays true for very long. It's like, you have to think of our emotions like energy. There's a crescendo. There's like a wave of energy that comes over you. And once you admit it and release it, it passes right through. But what happens to most of us is we go, it's not nice to be angry. I'm not angry. I'm not angry. I'm fine. I'm actually just totally fine. Yeah, I'm fine. And then the energy gets trapped in our bodies, and then it becomes anger at ourselves, which is depression.
Autoimmune.
Yes, it becomes anger that's unexpressed, which becomes anxiety. So, these conditions that many of us are dealing with are feelings that we have not allowed ourselves to fully feel. And what I want to encourage people to do is to allow the page to be a place, the one place maybe in your life where you are allowed to fully feel whatever the hell you feel. And I actually don't do a lot of cursing, but I use the F word intentionally because my dad's a therapist, and my dad says usually when people start saying the F word in sessions, he knows that they're really healing because they're really being willing to admit the fullness of how they feel. There's like a power to a strategically placed curse word that allows you to fully express the depth of how you feel. So I use that strategically in that setting to say, let it all out. Like, tell us exactly how mad you are. Don't follow social norms. Don't try to play to other people's expectations for what they think you're going to say or how they think you're going to feel or how you think you should feel or whatever. Just tell us how you feel.
Any wisdom on, because this is so personal to me, like dealing with autoimmune issues, and it came out of a season of complex post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
Anything you'd want to share about that, or any wisdom you've developed?
I healed an autoimmune disease.
Say more.
Through my writing practice. I healed my own autoimmune
Ally,
disease through my writing practice.
Tell me more.
It didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
Well, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease when I was probably 20 years old. I was really sick, losing hair, having a hard time eating. I was given a list of all these foods that I was allergic to and couldn't eat. And so the first step was I just took that as fact and started taking all the supplements the doctors told me to take. I cut out all the foods that were inflammatory for me. I spent probably 10 years of my life gluten-free, fructose-free, maybe 10 foods that I could eat with no symptoms, and just living a pretty small life. Like, I didn't eat out. I cooked my food at home. I was very careful with everything. And I took all the supplements, and I saw naturopaths, and I did acupuncture. And it was like a slow evolution from seeing kind of more Western medicine to like other options. And I saw a huge improvement in my symptoms, but not a healing, because I wasn't able to really live my life, or like fully have the joy of eating like a cinnamon roll. Like, there were so many things I couldn't do or couldn't eat. And fast forward to after my divorce, I was seeing a therapist, and she suggested to me, it was not the first time anyone had suggested this to me, but it was the first time I really let it in, that maybe the symptoms I was experiencing were not just physical. So she said, would you be willing to start journaling about it? And I said, sure. So I started journaling about, the stomach pain I was having, the digestive issues I was having, how I felt about the fact that I couldn't eat all these foods, or my friends would go out to eat and I would sit at the table and drink water and then come home and eat dinner by myself. And I started seeing these parallels between the emotional aspect and the physical aspect, like what's happening in the physical symptoms, the closure, the contraction, the tension, and the tension that I was feeling emotionally. And I just sort of started slowly picking away at it. And then she suggested to me, my therapist did, that I start maybe taking some of the foods that I hadn't allowed myself to eat, like blueberries were one of them. That was one of the first ones I did. And eating like a blueberry and seeing what happened and journaling about it. So it started really slow. I mean, it would take me an hour to tell the full story, but I literally would eat a blueberry and journal about it for a day or 2 days. Eat another blueberry, journal about it. Eat a bite of a carrot, journal about it. So there were all these foods that I couldn't eat. And slowly but surely, it took the first kind of wave of this took me quite a while, actually. It was like 6 months or 8 months or something. But I started to be able to tolerate, I could eat a small handful of blueberries. I could eat a few carrots. I could eat this. I could eat that. And then I was introduced to Joe Dispenza's meditations. I don't know if
we talked about Joe last time you were on the pod.
Mm-hmm. So I started doing his meditations every morning. I was meditating. And then too many links to share all the people who have been huge mentors in my life. But Kyle Cease is another person I was introduced to. He talked about meditating for 2 hours every morning, which when I first heard that, I was like, that's absurd. Who has the time to meditate for 2 hours every morning? But I started doing Joe Dispenza's meditations, which are an hour and 20 minutes long. And I would do them every single morning when I woke up. And when I started doing the meditations, the healing for the autoimmune disease came in like weeks. Like I was like, this is right about the time I was getting married. And by the time I was on my honeymoon, I was eating anything. I could eat anything I wanted. And I still, to this day, can eat anything I want.
Isn't that a metaphor for something greater, though? I think that's really beautiful. To this day, you said, I can now eat anything I want. I think that represents something bigger and speaks like
1,000%.
You know, I'm thinking about, dang, you could write that in a book and the spin-offs of what that means in metaphor and the implications for our systemic healing are powerful. What do you think? I don't know, drill down on that a little bit. I could eat anything I want. Play that into your emotional health and your mental health. How would you transpose that?
It is an ability. So I was saying before that there's like the parallel between the physical symptoms and the emotional. So this sort of closure or clamp down that I had before, to where now it's like, I remember one of the mantras that I used during my divorce was, everything that happens to me is an opportunity to learn. So it's like a full openness to whatever life wants to bring me, I can receive it. I can let it in. I can digest it. I can transmute it. My body, and I would say this to myself, this is one of the things that writing helped me come up with this mantra for myself. When I would eat foods that I previously hadn't been able to eat, I would say to myself 100 times in a day, I would go, my body knows exactly what to do with this. It takes it in, it breaks it down, it takes the nutrients, and it discards the rest. And there's a definite parallel there between how I receive food in my body and how I receive emotional or other experiences that come into my world. It's like toxic people come into my life and whatever. I know my body knows exactly what to do with this. I know how to filter out the toxins. I know how to take what's good for me and get rid of the rest. Like I know exactly how to not compartmentalize in a bad way, but sort of how to like break those down into two separate groups and just flush out what isn't needed.
This is so huge. And this is just a sideway comment a little bit, guys, but Ally, what you said is so powerful because I think we need to learn. So when we're in a stressful situation, a painful conversation, whatever, we've got the shame spiral hitting. Oftentimes we say, what am I thinking? What's happening in my mind? I'd say we need to listen to our bodies first.
100,000%.
Right? Why?
But the avoiding of the body is also a defense mechanism. That's really important. So everyone talks about embody. I feel like so much of what's happening in spirituality and self-help right now is really good, but it sometimes isn't nuanced enough to really help somebody. Yeah. So the idea of embodiment, for example, is like such a buzzword right now. And it's like, get into your body, feel your body, feel your body. Well, the reason that you don't feel your body is because it at one point in your life was not safe to go there. You know, like if you have like a massive childhood trauma like I do, I decided at 4 years old, it wasn't safe to live in my body. I had to leave my body to make it safe to get through the experiences that I was having. So yeah, when I'm 19 and 20, of course I'm having issues with the body that are sort of trying to call me back to the body, but I'm just like, nope, not going there. Just give me a pill. Just tell me what pill I have to take so that I don't have to feel this, you know, versus slowly that 2% going like, I'm going to eat a blueberry and I'm going to give myself permission to feel this. Yeah, there might be some pain. I can handle it. I know my body knows exactly what to do with this.
That's so huge. I knew going into this conversation, I was like, Ally's coming back. This is going to be fire, and I can't wait. We got to talk about writing still and the practices of that. But I want to ask this because it's related to this beautiful metaphor you've established for us. What about writing our stories allows us to see things more objectively? So let's go back to the Pennebaker model where it's like we're just writing feverishly, 15 to 20 minutes, no self-editing, no worries, just get it out. Like,
yeah.
What about writing allows us to see things more objectively compared to the narratives that play inside the mind? Because those narratives might be incomplete. Often they are. But when we write, we see it objectively. You want to split that apart?
Yeah. I mean, people who are familiar with self-help and spirituality and even like mental health content usually have an objection to the idea of shaping their story where they think, you know, my story doesn't matter. My story is sort of like, my story is just a projection of my mind, which I think there's some truth to that. However, what you need to understand is that your brain is making up stories about your life, whether you do it intentionally or not. And in fact, if you aren't doing it intentionally, someone else is probably doing it for you and feeding it back to you. The media is a great example of this. Spinning stories, making them up, and feeding you the stories that make you feel afraid, make you feel like a terrorist attack is coming, make you feel like this election that's coming up, the world's going to explode, everyone's going to hate each other, we're all going to die. So that is a story that's being fed to you that if you're not standing on really solid ground, this is what my story's about. This is the controlling idea of my story, and I know who I am inside of my story. Then you're going to be very vulnerable to the stories that are coming in at you. So stories come in at us from the media. They come in at us from our spouses. Our spouses even the most well-meaning spouse in the world tells you a story about you. Maybe it's a positive story, but it might not be your story. It's not the story that you want to tell. Your parents, most of us have taken on a story. Our parents maybe told us we were too loud, or we were too much, or we were complicated, or we were the difficult child, or, you're a burden. And we have a way of taking on that story that our parents told us about ourselves. And the shape of that story acts like a blueprint. It will create your experience over and over and over again outside of your conscious awareness. So if I've decided the story about me is I'm complicated, I'm a burden, every experience I have in my life is going to validate that story. So what writing your story does is it gives you an opportunity to intentionally craft the story. I do think stories are they have an expiration date, stories don't grab on so tightly to a story that you're like, this is my story, I must tell my story. But the idea of writing your story is that we're constantly rewriting and rewriting and rewriting the story to serve our present moment. And when we're aware that that's something that our brain is doing anyway, we can do it with much more intentionality instead of just regurgitating the stories that have been fed to us.
Incredible. Okay, so the question begs, how do we start? When do we start? How do we build this habit of writing on a regular basis? You can take us inside the Write Your Story framework or whatever you think would be helpful for folks. Let's just assume that most of the people are like, nah, this isn't about writing a book to me. Again, this is about healing. What would you tell them?
Well, I wrote this book to that person.
Exactly.
I really wrote this book for someone who... It would work for someone who's looking to publish a book, but that's not who I wrote it for. I wrote it for someone who's like, I know I have a story to tell. I really want to do this, but I feel overwhelmed. I'm not a writer. I don't know where to start. I wanted this book to be a no-brainer. I wanted to make it a no-brainer for someone to sit down and write their story. So I teach an 8-part framework in the book. I break it down piece by piece so that you can write one little part of the story at a time. The idea, if you read through the book from start to finish, is to write one event from your life in 3 to 5 pages. So it's not even, you're not writing 50,000 words. You're writing 3 to 5 pages from one experience from your life. And if you want to turn that into a longer piece, you could do that 5 or 10 or 50 times. And you could even turn it into like a memoir to style piece of writing that you could, pass down to your family or whatever you want to do with it. But I wanted it to be really bite-sized. I wanted it to be not overwhelming. I wanted it to be really simple and easy for anybody to take on this task, because that's where all the power is. When we take back our stories from the media, from the government, from toxic religion, from broader culture, from our parents, from our whatever, all the stories that are running like programs in our brains, when we take back our story and when we tell it for ourselves, each of us as individuals, the world shifts and changes. I've watched this happen for myself. I've healed an autoimmune disorder. I've navigated this, passage from a divorce to this really happy, healthy, lovely marriage that I'm in now. And now I'm living a different story. There's a whole different story that's unfolding in my life right now that maybe I'll get to tell more publicly someday. But each time that I walk through a new season of my life, I'm conscious of the fact that there are these old stories they're operating out of my conscious awareness. And my life gives me an opportunity to pull them into my consciousness and to decide, is this serving me, or would I like to upgrade it? Would I like to rewrite the moral to the story so that I have a new blueprint, so that my life can start to show me proof of the blueprint that I've written? So if the old blueprint was, you're a burden, you're a problem, you're the problem child, and my life shows me all this evidence of that, maybe the news story is like, I'm powerful. I can create my own experience, and my life shows me evidence of that.
Take us inside the tactical side of it. Maybe people are asking, okay, Ally, do I write in the morning, in the afternoon, at night? Do I need to kind of zone in and get a quiet, comfortable spot? Do I write pen and paper? Do I use a computer, my iPhone? Like, what do we need to know about that? Because I'm sure the Enneagram ones out there like me that are listening going, I don't want to screw this up and then miss it.
Sure. There's a whole chapter in the book where I teach about writing rituals. And what I talk about is understanding a different ritual is going to work for different people, because some people write best in the morning. Some people write best late at night. Some people write best on paper. Some write best on their computer. So there's not like one way that I could teach that's going to work for everyone. But the one thing that is helpful to understand as you create your rituals is that you have two parts of your brain that are operating. One is, many parts of your brain, but two that are important to the writing process. One is your frontal cortex, which is where all your higher level thinking comes from, and one is your limbic system. And getting into the writing process, the process of writing your story, it's important that we learn how to drop into the limbic system, because that's where your unconscious stories live. So in order to get into the limbic system, we have to find creative ways to disengage that frontal cortex, which is it's like operating all the time, right? Like in the modern world, you need your prefrontal cortex to survive. It's the part of your brain that helps you pay a bill on time, that reminds you got to go pick up your kids from school at X time of the day, that's helping you manage the time flow and how many things need to be done and deadlines and all that sort of stuff. So it's an important part of your brain, but it is also going to prevent you from going down into the unconscious layers. So we have to find creative ways to get into the unconscious layers. And there are lots of different tricks or tips I could give for that, but things like writing first thing in the morning, that's why that practice works so well. Not everybody can write first thing in the morning. I have two little kids who they wake me up in the morning at 5:45. So I'm not writing first thing in the morning. But understanding that the minute I get on my phone, the minute I get on my computer, the minute my day sort of kicks in, my frontal cortex is like real active. So I'm gonna have to find another way to get in to my limbic system if I'm not writing first thing in the morning. And some people like to write at like 10 p.m., 10 to 2 in the morning is another creative window where your limbic system is very active. And so that can also work for someone. I teach people to get their heart rate up. Let's say you are gonna do a writing session at 2 p.m., go get your heart rate up before you do your writing session, because getting your heart rate up disengages your frontal cortex, and it will help you drop into that more unconscious part of your brain. So right after you take a yoga class, or right after you go for a walk or a jog, or right after you go to the gym or whatever, there are all these different tips and tricks that you can learn to sort of trick your brain into getting to that important unconscious part. And I talk about that in the book. I teach a whole chapter on, the writing rituals that can help you get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So folks, you might be wondering, what is this book? It's Write Your Story, Ally Fallon. It's available right now. Head to the show notes at wintoday.tv. I'm sure it's available everywhere books are sold as well. Again, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But Ally, these are your words. Storytelling invites us to do far more than commit our life to paper. It guides us to ask the big questions that stories answer. What are some of those questions?
Well, stories operate around questions. It's questions that keep us engaged in stories. The main question that keeps us engaged in a story is what's going to happen next. And think of how that question keeps you engaged in your life. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen tomorrow? Is it going to be good or bad? That open loop keeps you pretty locked in. That's for a lot of us, that open loop keeps us almost like hyper-focused on the moment, on the next moment. What's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen after that? Then what? And then, are things going to work out for me? So when you start to pay attention to the questions that are driving your life, you can begin to understand the questions that are driving your story. The value of a question in a story, a question that opens a loop at the beginning of a story, is it keeps the reader engaged on that one topic from the very beginning of the story to the very end of the story. So whether that question is something as simple as, is the guy going to get the girl? Or will he be able to disarm the bomb and save the people, or is everyone going to die? Those are questions where you can sense the stakes inside of the question, and it sends you on one single track from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. You go to the movie theater and you sit in your seat for 2 hours and you are focused on what's happening on the screen for 2 full hours. because you're trying to get the answer to that one question. And we can use this to our advantage in life, right? Because life is chaotic and it's distracting and there's all this different information coming at us all at the same time. So when you can figure out what's the story question that's driving my story, then you can get your brain to stay on that one track. And we can also learn to ask better questions. I talk about this in the book, like why questions. I've learned through my work with authors, why questions are kind of dead-end questions. Like, why did he leave me? Why did that happen? Why did my mom die? It's like, why is the sky blue? Well, because it is. That's just is what it is. There's no real great answer to that question. Nothing that's going to satisfy the curiosity of your brain. So when you can learn to ask a better question, like, who might I meet next? Or how could it be possible for me that I could find work that I really love? When you can learn to ask who questions or how questions or what questions that can take you on that one single track until your brain answers the question, we can actually begin to guide our focus and attention on a narrative arc, and it cancels out the noise.
Anything more you'd want to say on why questions are dead ends? That's fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know why they're dead ends, but why questions don't have satisfying answers. Why did he leave me? What does it matter? Like, here I can say this from my divorce, because that was the question I was asking. Why did he do this to me? It's like, what does it matter? So you find out the answer to that question. Who cares? It doesn't change anything. It's like, his motivations have nothing to do with my story. Even figuring out the answer to that, which, I mean, it's a moving target too, because it's like, what if he tells you why he did it? Do you believe him? What if someone else tells you? Is that accurate? But when you learn to put yourself in the position of the hero of the story, you start asking a different question. Like, here was my question. What makes a woman walk down the aisle and marry a man she does not want to marry? That was a much more interesting question to me that took me on a journey that healed me, because I remembered on my wedding day standing at the top of the aisle and my dad's like, "Are you ready?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm ready." And my head is nodding. And inside I'm going, I don't want to do this. So what made me choose to do something that I didn't want to do? And by the way, answering that question is freedom. It's liberation for me. Because once I figure out my own motivations, then I can readdress those motivations and heal the wound and live a different life. But as long as I'm trying to figure out his motivations, it's like, it's a dead end street. What does it matter?
Yeah, one of the questions as you were presenting this, I was thinking about is, who am I becoming? Mm-hmm. The life experiences that add up and the cumulative life experiences that I have in the record of my story. Who am I becoming as a result of this? Who am I becoming as a result of the narratives I'm hearing and believing? It's all formative, right? And I suppose this is where we can land today, because what I don't want people to do, and folks, listen, this is not about a life hack. This is not a checkbox to go, yep, I got this figured out. Ally, I think this is more about formation and transformation. It becomes a necessary practice for formation of our spirit, souls, and bodies. Nuance that as you'd like as we land this plane. Yeah,
I mean, there's no destination that you're trying to get to. There's no story that you land on that you go, yeah, finally I got that story settled. It's a constant evolution. It's a working document. It's like your life is a working document. Stories are built around the transformation of the main character. They start with the character, that hero of a story, looking one way, and they end with the hero looking some different kind of way. And that's how you know the story is over. You know the story is over when the hero has changed. Sometimes the hero got what he was after in the beginning of the story, and sometimes they didn't. But the way that the viewer or the reader knows that the story is over is that the hero has changed. And so the question you asked is perfect. Who am I becoming? How do I want to change through this process? Who do I want to be on the other side of it? And how will I know? Another question is, how will I know that I've become that person? What's the external identifier? Like, what's the thing on the outside that will prove to me that I've done it? I've reached that mountain peak. It's usually not I made $1 million. Guy got the girl, I'm on my wedding day. Like the end of Indestructible, the climactic scene in that book is me standing alone on a beach doing yoga, feeling okay in my body by myself for the first time in years. And the reason why that's the climactic scene is because it shows the reader that I've changed.
Mm-hmm. You're phenomenal, Ally. I have loved this conversation today. It's like we've gone over the map today, but I think the point is you've given us yet another tool for the toolbox for those of us that are seeking and pursuing not just the change of a circumstance, but the change of our lives from the inside out, formative, transformative, all that kind of stuff. So I'm so thankful for you. Anything else today?
I just want to say one last thing, which is that
Please.
for a long time when I was doing this work, I felt like I was in the business of convincing people to write their stories. And I'm at a place now where I'm like, if this calls to you, because I find for a lot of people, it really calls to them. Like that season I was in during my divorce where I couldn't stop myself. I really, really wanted to do it. And so I would just say, if you're hearing this and you're just like, no, thank you, then move on and go find another tool that really does call to you, because there are so many ways to engage in the healing process. But if you're listening to this and you're like, this really calls to me, but I'm scared. This really calls to me, but I'm not a writer. This really calls to me, but I just feel like I have terrible grammar or it's overwhelming or whatever. I hope that the book, that Write Your Story, can be the tool that you need to engage with this process that's already calling to you. So that's what I hope that it will do for people.
That's so good.
I'm just grateful to have gotten to have this conversation with you today.
Thanks, Ally. Hey, very last question. Why this book now? I think oftentimes people write for certain seasons. Why this message now? What's going on?
I mean, for me personally, it feels like kind of the capstone on the work I've been doing for the last 15 years. And I think I'm about to like move into something that's slightly different. This is like the new story that I'm writing in my life that I'm sure I'll get to talk about more as it evolves. I feel like something big is shifting in my life. I've had 2 kids in the last 3 years, and motherhood has brought out a different side of me. And there's just an evolution of the way that I'm going to show up in the world. And this book, for me personally, is like the capstone on the research and the work that I've been doing, the career that I've had for the last 15 years. As far as what's happening in the world, I mean, I just think people everywhere I go, I'm meeting people who say, I want to write my story. Where do I start? And so I hope this book is able to meet people right where they're at and able to help them engage with the process of writing and able to unlock the story that lives inside of them and help them see how truly remarkable that they are. And I know it'll find its way to exactly who needs to read it. I don't know if that'll be 5 people or if it'll be 5 million people, but we'll see.
That's good. Ally, thank you so much. Hey, I want people to just stay connected to your work and learn more. How can they do that?
Best way is writeyourstory.com.
Great.
You can learn more about the resources and courses and stuff that I provide there. And then Ally Fallon on Instagram, just ALLYFALLON. And that's the social media platform where I'm the most active. So find me there,
Amazing.
find me at writeyourstory.com. And yeah, go buy the book.
Yeah, you bet. Ally, thanks for another remarkable conversation.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me.